Figurative. So today I want to review U.S. presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. So to contextualize this a little bit, so Vivek Ramaswamy is running for president in the United States. He is of Indian origin. However, he has stated clearly that he is a Hindu, and that is unusual, let's say, amongst candidates running for presidency in the United States. I'm not advocating for Vivek Ramaswamy nor against. This isn't my purpose whatsoever with this series. I'm rather commenting on the claims he makes in this video. The video is Vivek Ramaswamy questioned about his Hindu faith. And the reason I want to comment on them is because, as we know with politicians, their words can often be questioned, doubted, or how sincere is he really being? And so I want to scrutinize the claims made by Vivek Ramaswamy about his Hindu faith, to see whether they are true and they have a basis in Shastra, in scripture and tradition or not. And so for those of you who have been doubting or questioning, does he really mean what he says? Is what he is saying accurate? Because it seems almost too good to be true. Then I'm going to break it down for you, and I'm going to show you, as I said, whether Vivek Ramaswamy is telling the truth or not. Now, for the most part, spoiler alert, he is. But the point is that he is, of course, speaking to a predominantly Christian audience, to a predominantly Christian Western society with different sets of, I would say, contextual understandings of some of these claims. And so clearly he's using language which panders a little bit to that need to communicate more effectively with that audience. And so we have to give him some leeway in that respect and understand the context in which this conversation is happening as well. And at the very end of this video, I'll have a little criticism and a little feedback for Vivek Ramaswamy of how he could stay even truer to his words than he has already. So let's get to it.
So I am, for those of you who may not have known, I'm Hindu, which is a little different than the traditional faith people who run for U.S. president. And I'll tell you a little bit about my faith. It's actually very important to me. It's what gives me my freedom. And in many ways, it's what led me to this journey that we're on now. I can tell you about that. My faith teaches me that there's one true God, that He put us here for a purpose, and that we have a moral duty to realize that purpose. My parents taught me that we're all equal because God resides in each of us, that He works through us. He works through us in different ways, but we're His instruments, and it's not just being done by us, it's being done through us, and that's what makes us equal, is that fact that God resides in each of us. That's where our equality comes from.
So let's take a look at some of those claims that he made. First, the first claim was that as a Hindu, he believes in one true God. True. That statement is true. So Hinduism is mistakenly conceived of as being polytheistic. That is false. No matter whether you are an Advaitin or a Dvaitin, which means a non-dualist or a dualist, this principle holds true regardless. So it's the idea that there is one supreme reality that assumes many forms in the Advaitic concept, or in the Dvaitic concept, such as Vaishnavism, for example. It is one supreme person of which every other manifestation is a part of, an extension of, or a form of. But there is one sovereign, one supreme deity. And so it is a form of monotheism. It is, however, a qualified monotheism. It isn't a monotheism in the sense that Islam is monotheistic, for example, to make let's say, perhaps the biggest contrast. But it is clearly monotheistic. And actually, the more accurate term to use would be it's panentheism. So panentheism means that God is the totality of creation and yet transcends creation. So, for example, when somebody says, the universe is God, the universe is speaking to me, that in this viewpoint would only equate to creation. So creation is known as the universe, Jagat, which means the material universe. That is not the totality of God. So God is the universe and beyond. He transcends the universe also. So the terminology would be that God is both immanent and transcendent. So immanent is that He is this reality and present, pervades this reality, can be found in this reality, encountered in this reality, and also beyond this reality, okay? So panentheism, that is Hinduism. It is a qualified monotheism. And so Vivek Ramaswamy is absolutely right in saying that as a Hindu, he believes in one true God. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, verse 46, Krishna says, "The Lord is the one from whom all beings have evolved and by whom all this is pervaded. By worshipping him through one's own duty, one attains that perfect state. So here we see exactly what I was just saying. The Lord is the one, as Vivek Ramaswamy said, from whom all beings have evolved and by whom all this is pervaded. So he pervades all of this. He is immanent. Everything has come from him. He is transcendent to creation at the same time. So in this sense, absolutely right. Whether Vivek Ramaswamy is an Advaitin or Advaitin, I don't know. That doesn't become clear throughout this video and other videos where he speaks about his faith. But nonetheless, both viewpoints are compatible with his claim and are therefore factual. The next point he makes is that he put us here for a purpose. God put us here for a purpose, and we have a moral duty to realize that purpose. Again, true. So as in the previous verse, we see that worshiping God through our duty, we attain perfection. So it said, the Lord is the one from whom all things have come from, and he pervades everything. We should worship him through our duty. The question is, what duty? What is duty? And for that, we have to come to the word dharma. And so dharma is a difficult word to translate. It has been used in many different contexts in various different scriptures, but I would say that the most universal meaning for the word dharma is purpose. Everything has a purpose. It's dharma. So when I am going to carry out my dharma, it means I'm fulfilling my purpose, my duty. And so everything in this world, we believe in the Hindu worldview, has embedded objective meaning. Now, another can come and attribute some secondary subjective meaning to something, but it has embedded purpose. So human beings have an embedded purpose. This earth has an embedded purpose, a dharma to fulfill, so to speak. And so therefore, when he says that God has put us here for a purpose and we have a moral duty to realize that purpose, he's absolutely right, because that speaks to the essence of Hindu thought, which is we have a reason for being here and it is our duty to carry out that reason. But purpose can be found in two different categories, what we call Vishwadharma and Swadharma, which means a universal purpose, a universal dharma that is applicable to all people at all times in all circumstances. And then you have the Swadharma, which means your personal purpose, your personal dharma of this particular embodiment, of this particular incarnation. And that is circumstantial, it is time restrictive, it is about one particular, as I said, identity and birth. Of course, knowing that we believe in reincarnation and therefore have many births, and each birth would have its own individual purpose, its own Swadharma. So when we speak about worshipping God through our duty, the Vishwa Dharma, the universal Dharma, is to worship God. It's to commune with God. So the universal purpose of every Hindu is to commune with God. Again, whether that is in a non-dual or dualistic viewpoint. And that is true no matter which incarnation you're in, no matter time and circumstances. Everything is to be viewed through that lens, that whatever I am doing is for the greater purpose of communing with God. Okay, so that is why the verse of the Gita that I read to you earlier references worshipping God through your duty. So no matter what your duty is, you're using that as a means of connecting and communing with God. So that is the Vishwadharma. And the Swadharma is, for example, I'm a doctor or a policeman or a teacher or whatever it may be. Okay, so that is the practical duty, the individual duty of your particular birth, and it is to be done in light of the universal duty that everybody has, which is to commune with God, to serve God and worship God. So therefore, again, 2 out of 2. Vivek Ramaswamy is completely right in saying that this is a Hindu belief. I will caveat what he said only in one way, which is that he said, God put us here. And that is tenuous language. It's not that it's completely inaccurate. He did put us here to begin with. However, every consequent birth has had, at the very least, a collaboration between his will and our karmic consequences. So our choices have led to various outcomes, including us being here, us continuing to be here. And so, yes and no to the idea of him having put us here. It is at best a collaborative effort, but that needs to be understood. So a little nuance there that I'm not going to dive into any further at this point. The next point that Vivek Ramaswamy makes is we are all equal because God resides in each of us. Absolutely true. So that is exactly the principle of equality in Hinduism. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, verse 15, Krishna says, I dwell in the hearts of all. So the idea of Krishna, of God residing in each of us, is not just metaphorical. It's not just as a nice visualization, a nice idea. No, it is actually factual. So we have the idea that the Atma, which is our individual soul, is accompanied by The Paramatma. So the Paramatma is the what we call the super soul. It is God localized inside each living being, accompanying the soul, accompanying the Atma as a sort of supervisor, as a sort of companion. There are different ways in which you can see it, but basically there is an equal presence of God inside every single living being. In fact, inside everything, as we saw in the verse earlier, that God pervades all of his creation as well. And so pervasiveness is God's one of God's primary identifiers, functions, attributes, however you wish to term it. But basically, God pervades all things. Therefore, he is inside of me just as much as he is inside any of you. And therefore, that breeds one sort of equality, that God is equally present in all of us without preference. Again, I had already spoken about God being transcendent and immanent. And so this idea of God's all-pervasive principle has been dealt with, but it also means that everybody can encounter him equally. God is not resting in one place that some people are closer to or further from, physically speaking. God is not in the Middle East, or he's not in India, or he's not somewhere else. He is all-pervading, which means every single person has equal access to him, physically speaking. Practically speaking. So there's another form of equality that Hindus believe in because of the presence of God inside of everything. Because God is not transcendent, such as in the case of Islam, where Allah is deemed as being 100% transcendent, not immanent. So Allah does not enter into his creation. Even when the Prophet Muhammad was receiving the revelation of the Quran, he was receiving it through the Archangel Gabriel, who was playing as the messenger, let's say, from Allah to the Prophet Muhammad, because Allah does not enter into his creation. And so that is a clear distinction here in Hinduism. God is pervading all of his creation. Creation is in fact a part of him. And therefore, because of that, he is equally accessible to all of us and present inside all of us, forming an equality in that sense. Now, in chapter 9, verse 32, Krishna says, "By surrendering to me, whatever their birth, race, sex, or caste, even those whom society scorns, will attain the supreme state." Now this shows, and it goes an extra mile, it shows an even different kind of equality that is also present in Hindu thought and in the Bhagavad Gita, which is that God is not partial to anybody. He's not partial, nor does he hate anyone. The conditions for fulfilling life's purpose are equal to everyone, which is to surrender to him. So as you surrender your life in trust and in faith and in love to God, no matter what you are, no matter where you come from, no matter your race, birth, wealth, position in society, role in society, none of these factors matter. And he goes this extra mile by saying, even those who society scorns, as if to reinforce the fact that even the people who you think should not be deserving of this, or who are not equally placed in a position to achieve this, that is not the case. I am equally available to all those persons, okay? So again, Vivek Ramaswamy is absolutely correct so far, and this is the scriptural backing for what he has said. Krishna dwells in the hearts of all, and that by surrendering to him, irrespective of what differences we may have, we will all attain the supreme state of being. The next claim that Vivek Ramaswamy makes is that God works through us. We are his instruments, and things are not being done by us, but through us. Well, once again, true. So in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, verse 16, Krishna says, "The fool with an underdeveloped intelligence who sees only himself as the agent does not see at all." Now he says this in light of verse 14 of the same chapter, in which he lists the 5 factors of action. So what that means is that when an action happens, there are actually 5 contributing factors to an outcome. And 4 of those rest with the material world, with ourselves. So for example, the skills that I exert, the efforts that I make, the sense organs that I possess, how trained and qualified they are. So for example, if I want to sing, the quality of my vocal cords, my sense organ of voice compared to someone else will dictate the quality of the outcome. But one of the factors that Krishna lists as well is the divine, God himself. Now, this includes God's laws, such as karma. So karma might dictate that something should happen in a particular way. But God's will, God's sanctioning principle, God's controlling principle is a factor in every single action that is performed at any given time, which means that as the Paramatma residing within each of us, as God's presence resides in each of us, he is observing all actions being undertaken before they are even able to manifest. So there is the process by which an action comes to fruition, and then there's the actual fruition, the actual manifestation of said action. And we believe that that action does not come into fruition without God's permission. So God can intervene and he can stop it as the fifth amongst five factors of action, five causes of action, if you want to term it in that way. And so this is to be understood as God being an inner guide and a sanctioner of the individual's conditioned will. It doesn't therefore eliminate the will of the individual, but it guides it from inside, and it can condition it as per his will, right? So our will doesn't become nullified, it becomes directed or conditioned at different moments. And so therefore, clearly, yes, God is working through us. Everything that we are doing is by the fact that it is the very principle of God's existence within us which gives life and gives us the ability to do what we do. But even further to that, he's actually proactively involved in our decision-making process in the various parts of our lives that we experience. There are other verses in chapter 18 where Krishna says that he controls the actions of all individuals from within, as if we were seated upon machines. So there are plenty of references in scripture in the Bhagavad Gita that point to God's working through us. And so therefore, the verse that I outlined just now, verse 16 of chapter 18, Krishna says that it is a fool with underdeveloped intelligence that sees only himself as an agent, right? So it's us and God working together. That is the right way to see action. So in this section of the video, Ramaswamy is accurate in everything that he has said so far. I've given the scriptural references as to what he is saying. A couple of caveats here and there, but for the most part, he is being absolutely truthful and accurate in his representation of his Hindu beliefs. So let's move on to the next part.
I happen to be raised in a pretty traditional household as well. My parents instilled in us, and I'm grateful they did from a young age. You don't appreciate it at a young age. I probably wouldn't have called myself a person of faith for much of my early 20s when I was in college and otherwise, but I came back to it. They taught us that family is the foundation, that marriage is sacred. They were very traditional, that it's between a man and a woman, that divorce is not some preference that you opt for. Abstinence before marriage is the way to go, that the good things in life involve a sacrifice. It's not just about this life, but about eternity. That there's more to this life than the aimless passage of time, that we're put here for a purpose. And we have a duty to realize that purpose.
So here in the second part, Vivek Ramaswamy speaks a lot about values. It's more about values than beliefs. He speaks about family being the foundation, about marriage, abstinence before marriage, different things like this. And I'm going to unpack them in a little methodical way. I think he is broadly correct, but there are some contextualizations that you need, and things aren't as black and white as he seems to present them. Okay, so first of all, in Hinduism, there are what we call 4 ashrams, or 4 stages of life that one would traditionally go through. Again, not many ascribe to this these days, but it is the traditional view. Those 4 stages are brahmachari, where you are a celibate student and your main aim in life is to study and prepare yourself for your future life. The second stage, grihastha, which means a householder, when you start a family and you're then providing for that family, working for that family, etc. And sex life is, of course, permissible. Then you have the third stage, which is called vanaprastha, which literally means retreating to the forest, where you start to retire from your societal functions and duties, raising the family because your children have already become adults, and you no longer work as much as you did before, if at all. And then you have the fourth and final stage, which is an option. Some take it, some don't. Traditionally, it was always present, which is sannyasi, which is when you renounce all duties, when you renounce the world completely, and you sometimes go and live in an ashram, and you dedicate yourself exclusively to the pursuit of your spiritual liberation, of attaining God, of fulfilling your universal dharma, which is, of course, communion with God. So these 4 stages have to be understood, and all the claims that Ramaswamy is making will be understood in relation to this traditional view. However, it has to be said that modern Hinduism is adaptable, has adapted, and no longer lives by these principles so strictly. So always keep that in the back of your mind when you're listening to what I'm explaining to you now. Then there are 4 purusharthas, which are goals, objectives for human beings to achieve throughout their life. Those 4 being, first, dharma, which is not only purpose, but morality. So understanding morality, duty, righteousness. Then you have kama, which is pleasure, and that may include sex life, for example. Then you have artha, which is material prosperity, getting security, a house, a job, all of these things. And lastly, moksha, which is liberation from the cycle of birth and death, known as samsara, reincarnation. Okay? So these things, this is a cohesive system that works together. And when we analyze Vivek Ramaswamy's claims in light of this, you will start to understand the foundation to those claims. Okay? I'm going to qualify some of them nonetheless, and I'm going to give you the very conservative traditional view, and then I'm going to give you a more, let's say, real life situation and how it's actually encountered and lived out within Hindu groups. So first and foremost, family is the foundation. Mostly true. You have in the Taittiriya Upanishad a very famous verse, most Hindus are familiar with it, in which it says the following: honor thy mother as God, honor thy father as God, honor thy teacher as God, honor thy guest as God. So most Hindu households know this verse, they live by this principle. Mother and father are to be honored on the same standing as God. And so clearly there's a great deal of respect for parents, for the family, as well as guru and guest as the remaining 2 members of this verse. The Manusmriti is a very traditional text. It comes from the section of scripture known as the Dharma Shastra, which deals with human conduct. However, I have to say that the Manusmriti is quite a circumstantial text, a societal and cultural text that was followed predominantly by the Brahmins, by the Vedic culture, yes, but nowadays most Hindus don't even know of their existence, and that has to be taken into account. And because Hinduism is as adaptable as it is, many of these principles are no longer practiced today, not by ignorance, but often also by choice and adapting to the ever-changing circumstances of society and societal norms. So, in the Manusmriti, chapter 9, verse 45, it says, "A man alone is nothing, he is incomplete. The perfect man is one who is completely united in harmony with his wife and children. These 3 are one." This speaks to the principle of the family, that the family is important, it is an important principle. Naturally, all of us are here because of that, right? So, clearly that is accurate, and Vivek Ramaswamy is not misleading anybody with such a claim. The next claim, marriage is sacred, it's between a man and a woman. Partially true. So it is sacred in what sense? That the marriage vow takes place before God. Absolutely right. In Hinduism, the marriage ceremony is like a puja, a worship, a ritual done with the members getting married and God, in which vows are taken not only for one life, but in fact for 7 lives. It is a very, very complex ceremony, very deep ceremony, clearly sacred, no doubts whatsoever. He is accurate in saying that. And it is traditionally between a man and a woman. Correct. It is traditionally between a man and a woman. That doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions. And it doesn't mean, again, that modern Hinduism has not evolved from that position. But yes, it is undoubtedly true. Scripturally speaking, it is traditionally held between a man and a woman. We have verses that speak to that, and even the marriage vows speak to that reality too. But for example, in the case of my mission, Bhakti Marga, Paramahamsa Vishwananda, he has opened that up much more to, again, what society knows and accepts these days. So again, adaptable, partially true. Divorce is not a preference you opt for. That is true with a small caveat. So why do I say it is not a preference? It's because Hindu culture and Hindu scriptures say that it is, in a sense, a last resort, not a preference that you simply choose. The Manusmriti verses 101 and 102 of chapter 9 says, "The married couple should try as hard as possible until death to maintain their marriage fidelity to each other. They should not do any act of dharma, artha, or kama apart from each other." So this speaks about marriage fidelity. So they should not break the fidelity of their marriage, right? And they should try their hardest. So this is an important understanding, and it also leaves room for the sannyasi stage of life that I had mentioned earlier, the renounce stage of life in which the couple may go their separate ways to pursue God, but they will not have broken the fidelity of their marriage in such a scenario. If marriage ends for the pursuit of God in the sannyasi ashram, then this is not viewed as a divorce, because it isn't actually a breaking of the fidelity of the marriage. So that is a way to contextualize it. So again, Ramaswamy is not really wrong here, just contextualizing it a little bit so that it's not understood in a Western way necessarily. Abstinence before marriage, so no sex before marriage. I think the easiest and most accurate thing I can say about it is that sex before marriage is not encouraged in Hinduism, but neither is it universally condemned. That's, I think, the most accurate way of looking at it. There are competing scriptural injunctions which speak to both directions. However, what I will say is because of the four stages of life, and that the brahmachari one is one in which you are expected to be celibate, and then you transition into grihastha, there is an inference that you could take that naturally that transition happens without any sexual relations outside of marriage. However, the line is a little bit more gray, because if that brahmachari exits the ashram of brahmachari and wishes to pursue grihastha and is in a relationship with the person that he is agreed to marry, then logically certain things may take place between them that would not be condemned, right? And so again, these are principles to live by, but they are not seen as hard and fast rules, because Hinduism in general is not a religion of hard and fast rules because of the principle of reincarnation, because things are not seen as so finite as they are, for example, in Christianity, where you have heaven and hell, commandments that you must not break under any condition, etc. Okay, so yes, he's partially right. I would say that it is not as universally accepted as Vivek Ramaswamy seems to be portraying. And the last principle, good things involve sacrifice. It's not just about this life, but about eternity. Well, here he's absolutely right, spot on. The Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, verse 37, speaks about a delayed gratification. It says, Svic happiness is like poison in the beginning, but eventually becomes like nectar. So why Svic happiness? So Svic happiness means the highest type of happiness. And that is a happiness that doesn't come from your interaction with the sense objects of the material world, but rather the divinity that rests within you. And as you go in pursuit of that divinity, what will you encounter other than yourself? And so that can be quite an unpleasant situation as you lift up the carpet and you encounter everything that you have inside, until you get to the purity that rests further within, beyond, let's say, all of the conditionings that you have accumulated throughout all of your lives. You will experience difficulty, poison. But if you persevere, you will get through to a much greater happiness that is unparalleled. And so Hinduism absolutely lives by the principle of delayed gratification over instant gratification that ends in harmful results. Okay? So absolutely right in saying that. And the part about life isn't just about the now, but about eternity, I think that holds true for all religious beliefs. I don't think that's a particularly exclusive claim, neither for Hindus, Christians, or anybody else. I think if you believe in an afterlife, then naturally that is true. And what comes after is almost always deemed as being as important, if not more, than what we are living here in the material world. So again, I would say a pretty accurate section for Vivek Ramaswamy. Some qualifications here and there. I think he paints it a little too black and white, and Hinduism, as we know, is a little bit more gray, but for the most part, accurate. Let's move on to the next part.
So I went to St. X High School, it's a Christian high school, and I read the Bible for the first time in 9th grade in scriptures class. And I love those years at St. X High School. Read the Ten Commandments pretty early on. What does it say? There's one true God. Honor his name. Don't take his name in vain. Observe the Sabbath. Respect your parents. Don't steal. Don't kill. Don't lie. Don't commit adultery. Don't covet. And I didn't feel like I was reading those for the first time.
Okay, so in this part is honestly where I feel like he starts to stretch the cord a little bit. Not breaking the cord, but he starts to stretch things a little bit, and I'm gonna speak on that. So, of course, here he's primarily talking about the 10 commandments of Christianity: don't take his name in vain, observe the Sabbath, etc. And I would say that some of these are, again, absolutely accurate, but now the first false statements start to creep into this. And I would probably pin this down more to how much he wants to connect with the Christian audience that is in the room, not necessarily to dishonesty, right? Because I'll go into each of these claims separately, but I would definitely say that he's allowing the room and the members in that room to influence his statements. Okay, so the first one: don't take God's name in vain. That is absolutely true. In the Padma Purana, in the Brahma Kanda, there are 10 offenses against the holy name of God that are listed. Not to say that every Hindu is aware of these or that they are, widely used in against people, but very, very clearly there are offenses to be made against the holy name. So the idea of not blaspheming, of not using God's name in vain, this is all factual, completely accurate. I have no issues whatsoever with him saying that that commandment is not new to him. It is present within Hinduism. True. However, the next statement, observe the Sabbath, and then he says that these things were not new to him, that they are also Hindu values. No, sorry. That's the first red flag that I'm putting up. Hindus do not observe the Sabbath. So the idea of the 7-day week is a predominantly Hebrew concept, predominantly Middle Eastern concept. In India, time was divided differently. So time wasn't measured by 7-day weeks, rather by what we call a paksha, which is a fortnight, a 2-week period of time, which is actually the time it takes for the full moon to come about and then the new moon. So there is the waxing and waning of the moon, and these two periods, these two pakshas culminate in these 2 days, the day of the full moon and the day of the new moon. The full moon is known as a Purnima and the new moon as Amavasya. And so those 2 days were held in special regard, but not in the way that the Sabbath is. So it wasn't about not working. It was about that you do specific things on those days. So on Purnimas, usually there is worship of the gods taking place. So God is worshipped on the Purnima, depending which Purnima, different god may be worshipped, but the one true God that rests behind those gods always. And then Amavasya is usually where you perform rituals in worship to your ancestors, in gratitude to your ancestors. So those 2 days, yes. However, because the Vedic culture was predominantly an agricultural culture, there were no rest days, there were no off days. So the animals needed to be tended to every day. So there wasn't this idea of a rest day where nobody would work. Women, for example, for the 4 main days of their menstrual period were always encouraged to rest and not work. So there were different ways in which rest would come about, but definitely no concept of a Sabbath. The 7-day week was non-existent. So a lot of these principles are not native to Hindu culture, nor to the Vedic revelation, to the Vedic Shastras. And so here, it is an unimportant point. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to now nitpick. Clearly not fundamental to the argument that he is making overall, Vivek Ramaswamy, but no, Hindus do not observe the Sabbath. And there is no real equivalent of it. Respect your parents, he says. Yeah, true. I've covered it above. I don't need to go into it again. Don't steal, don't kill, don't lie. True, true, true. In the Padma Purana, there are 12 principles of dharma, of moral behavior and moral conduct that are outlined. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are 30 principles that are outlined. I'm not going to go into all of those now, but I will address the specific parallels that he drew. So don't steal. So the Hindu equivalent of that, the Vedic equivalent would be asteya. So asteya means to non-stealing, to not steal. Steya means to steal, asteya means non-stealing. So that is one of the moral precepts that Hindus live by. So the idea is that you do not take what is not yours. Everything that you earn must be given to you freely or deserved. You do not take, therefore, what you have not earned and what has not been gifted to you consciously. So therefore, no stealing. That is clear and correct. Don't kill. Ahimsa. Ahimsa is another moral precept of Hinduism found in the Shastra. Ahimsa means, here have to be precise. Some people interpret ahimsa as being non-violence. That is not true. Ahimsa means the least amount of violence necessary to protect dharma itself. So to protect morality and the purpose to which things have been created for, violence may be exerted. So for example, in self-defense. So somebody comes to murder me. That is against the moral conduct, and therefore I may exert violence in defense of the moral conduct, which is that murder should not happen. If I allow murder to happen and I do nothing because I'm non-violent, then I am allowing for the violation of the dharmic principles of moral conduct, and I am not defending morality myself. Therefore, I am behaving in an adharmic way, which means immoral way, okay, against the purpose, against duty in this world. And so therefore ahimsa can be used contextually, which is also why Hindus are predominantly vegetarian, because they don't find the necessity to kill the animals, to exert that violence against the animals in order to sustain their bodies with nourishment. However, contextually, Hindus may eat meat. So if they are in the North Pole and there are no carrots to be grown, and you therefore have to eat fish or whatever it may be, that does not break the principle of ahimsa, and that people fail to understand. It is circumstantial. However, in today's modern society, it is almost beyond, let's say, anybody's, ability to argue that clearly we can live on a vegetarian diet. There are so many, let's say, facilities available, so many possibilities for how you can do that. And so therefore, as I said, predominantly Hindus are vegetarian and they live by these principles because of the moral precept of ahimsa. And the last one was don't lie. Well, again, another moral precept of Hinduism is satyam, that one should tell the truth. However, the truth should not be used with the intention of harming or hurting, because that would break the moral precept of ahimsa. So you have to see each of these moral precepts in light of the other moral precepts that form the overall moral code of Hinduism. And so, yes, you should always tell the truth, but not every truth should be said, as famously stated by Voltaire, if I'm not mistaken. So therefore, one should always speak the truth, but not every truth should be spoken, is absolutely the Hindu principle. It goes along, as I said, with ahimsa, so the truth to be spoken, but not with the intention of harming. A truth spoken with the intention of helping may cause harm, but as long as that was not the manner in which it was used, nor the intent, it is permissible. Okay, so these are absolutely true and parallel principles. Vivek Ramaswamy is right so far. He says, don't commit adultery. Again, this is an extension of both the brahmachari grihastha proposition that I made earlier and the asteya principle of non-stealing, which means to not take something that is not yours. Adultery is that. So therefore, yes, clearly no adultery in Hinduism is true. And don't covet. True. So that's a different principle. It's no longer asteya, because asteya is the actual act of stealing. Coveting is desiring. So that's something else. So that's the moral precept known as dhamma. So dhamma means self-restraint or self-control. So that is a principle that Hindus are called to live by. And self-restraint means not only physically, but also mentally. And it's about not taking more than what you need and to live in a state of balance. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that this path of yoga, this path towards God consciousness, is not for one who sleeps too much nor too little, who eats too much nor who eats too little. So there's a constant call to live life in a balanced way, in a self-restrained way. And so this is very much a principle that is brought forward here by Hinduism, by the Gita and Krishna. And in chapter 3, verse 37, Krishna says that desire is the enemy of the world. And so coveting, desiring, is absolutely a shared moral prohibition, so to speak. So in that sense, again, very, very, very accurate. Apart from that, misstep with the Sabbath, very, 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 very similar. So let's move on to the next part.
And that's when it hit me that these values don't belong to Hindus. And they don't belong to people of any one faith. They belong to God. And those are the values that I think this nation was founded on, those Judeo-Christian values. And so, will I stand for those values as their next president? You're darn right I will.
Here comes my last point, and my point of criticism for this video. So Vivek Ramaswamy, I absolutely commend him for standing up as a Hindu in an environment where Hindus have traditionally not been present, and to not water down his belief systems. Again, he has watered down the language, but that's completely permissible as long as there's no bait and switch going on. There is no lying going on, which he, as I said, didn't do for the most part. He has been absolutely sincere and accurate to his claims. One little caveat right here, which is he says, so because he could recognize that these values that the Christians proposed, the Ten Commandments and more, as he studied and read the Bible, were the same values that he grew up with in his Hindu household, in his Hindu traditional household. He says that these values don't belong to Hindus. He understood that. And then he goes on to say, these values don't belong to the people of any one faith. They belong to God. And I thought, bravo. Absolutely right. This is what a theist would have to believe, that the values are not socially created nor circumstantially made. They are rather embedded because they are values and moral precepts given by our lawgiver, which is God, and God being universal, the same God showing himself in different ways in different moments in history, that naturally the values of God would be universally found and therefore correct. These values don't belong to Hinduism nor to Christianity because those are frameworks by which one connects to God. Hinduism is a framework of relationship with God, as is Christianity and others. And so therefore absolutely right in saying that these are not Hindu values or Christian values, especially since the parallel of them was already highlighted. They are therefore God's values. Okay, I can accept such a claim. I can also, to play devil's advocate, see a scenario by which other values would be brought up that were not mentioned in the video, that I would say, well, no, they actually don't exist in Hinduism. Even the example of the Sabbath, right? And those we would have to scrutinize and see, well, perhaps those are more situational, circumstantial, cultural, to that place, to those people. And that's actually a pretty good way of finding a universality in the values of God, is that you take religions, you take their values, and that commonality seems to be the universal principles that rest in God, and there can be surrounded by a periphery of cultural contextualizations. But I digress. After having said such a wonderful sentence, that the values don't belong to Hindus nor any one faith, rather they belong to God, he follows it up by saying, and those are the values that I think this nation, the United States of America, was founded on, those Judeo-Christian values. So he ends by saying that the values that he just attributed to God and said do not belong to any one faith are in fact Judeo-Christian values. So there, Vivek Ramaswamy, we disagree. And I believe that you should stand firm on your claim. I understand that the likelihood with which you said that, or why you said that, is because that is the accepted norm, again, in your audience, in the room where you are speaking, that they believe, they have been told, and they believe, and perhaps even rightly so, that the United States was founded upon Judeo-Christian values. But you have just made a presentation, you have deconstructed that claim and made a presentation as to why that is not necessarily the case, but neither is it the case that they were founded on Hindu values. They were founded on the values of God that seems to be at least universal. And you have shown the similarity. I have shown scripturally the validity of your claims. Don't take a step back now to pander, because that is when mistrust starts to come into the equation. Now, again, to caveat all of this, overall, clearly very truthful, honest. My assessment of this is therefore well done, and I wish more people would be willing to stand for what they believe, even in the face of scrutiny and people who are clearly going to be opposed to what you're saying. So my hat's off to you, sir. But nonetheless, I would say don't compromise that and jeopardize the principle of truthfulness by falling back on people pleasing, which is what essentially this is. When you say to them, these values do not belong to a tradition, they are the values of God, and in the very next sentence you say, but this nation was founded on the Judeo-Christian values, which you just said that you also have because of your Hinduism, then I would say that is the one criticism and the one advice I leave to Vivek Ramaswamy in this video. Otherwise, very accurate in short video, 3 to 4 minutes. You can see it on YouTube. Vivek Ramaswamy explaining his faith. And I have to say, good job. I've given you the scriptural references and the backup for his claims. If anybody was doubting him, if anybody was questioning, is it really true that Christianity and Hinduism share so many values and even beliefs? The answer is absolutely yes. Nonetheless, a video could be made just as long, if not longer, showing some of the differences between them. But that can be spoken of at a different time, perhaps as a response to a different video by someone else pointing out more of the differences rather than the similarities, as Vivek Ramaswamy did this time. Again, congratulations. My respect to that, for that effort. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Jai Gurudev.